The United States has had many presidents, but whenever you teach history, it's hard to find time to teach about all of them in a detailed fashion. If you ask the average person, they probably won't remember something about every president. There are some presidents that are, for lack of better terms, forgettable. Washington created the country, Lincoln kept it unified, and FDR led it through World War II. Most of the presidents in between didn't exactly live up to that level of legacy. There have been many polls conducted about who the most forgettable president is, and it usually boils down to one of these four guys. One of them, though, is Rutherford B Hayes, a one-term president who not only had the longest facial hair of any president, but ended up forever changing the history of both the United States and Paraguay forever. Yes, you heard that right, Paraguay. So, Rutherford B Hayes impacted the United States forever just by winning his election. In 1876, he was running against Samuel J. Tilden, and we had a situation where the states of Oregon, Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina were all too close to call, leaving the results of who won the Electoral College up in the air. Basically, he ended up winning through a compromise. At the time, Union troops were still occupying many parts of the American South in the post-Civil War time called the Reconstruction Period. Basically, now that the slaves were liberated and given citizenship, the male African-American population could now vote. But Southern resistance to these things rose up in the form of violent groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, which made the case for keeping troops there. When Ulysses Grant was president, he used the troops to basically destroy the power of the first iteration of the Ku Klux Klan, which wouldn't come back for another few decades. However, many Southerners didn't like the continued occupation, as they felt like that now that they were back into the Union, they shouldn't be treated as an occupied enemy anymore. Rutherford B. Hayes made the Compromise of 1877, which promised that if those electoral votes of those disputed states were given to him to ensure his victory, he'd withdraw troops from the South and officially end Reconstruction. It was agreed, and so it happened. With Reconstruction over and with troops out of the South, it unfortunately allowed for Southern state governments to impose restrictive voter suppression and racist Jim Crow laws against African Americans that would last for nearly another 80 years. Some historians debate on the significance of this moment because some would argue that the South couldn't have been occupied forever and that Jim Crow was going to happen eventually. But regardless, this moment changed American history for a long time. The rest of the Hayes administration involved attempted civil reform with mixed results, the largest strike in American history at that time, and he fought for something called honest currency, which is just as confusing to me as it is for everyone else. And he tried to stop Congress from banning Chinese immigrants, which still ended up happening later on in the 1880s. Hayes definitely worked hard in his presidency, but most of the things he attempted either failed or wouldn't be resolved until much later. But he certainly did accomplish one lasting thing, and that's saving Paraguay. Paraguay is a landlocked nation in South America and is notable for being one of the first nations to win full independence from Spain and manage to keep it. But its neighbor Argentina historically controlled the territory when under Spanish administration, so they saw Paraguay as a breakaway nuisance of sorts, despite the community of Paraguay being quite different and more isolated from Buenos Aires. Paraguay, as a result, had weird borders because they had territorial disputes with all of their neighbors. Paraguay in the mid-1800s could have looked like this, or like this, or like this, depending on which country you asked. It makes it annoying for people who enjoy maps like myself. In 1864, war broke out between Paraguay and Brazil, which quickly expanded to include Argentina and Uruguay. This war, called either the Paraguayan War or the War of the Triple Alliance, lasted 6 years until 1870, when Brazilian and Argentinian troops were jointly occupying the country. The peace process for the war took forever, as the Triple Alliance originally planned to make a treaty together, but then Brazil decided to make a separate peace with Paraguay, which made Argentina upset. Brazil was sided with in 1872 with the Loisaca-Cotehipe Treaty, giving Brazil a good chunk of land. But Argentina was a different story thanks to the Chaco region. In 1876, they signed the Machain-Irigoyen Treaty, which gave some land to Argentina, but the Paraguayans refused to abandon the entire Chaco region, so it wasn't settled yet. The Chaco region was an area claimed by Paraguay and Argentina, as well as Bolivia, which wasn't even involved in this war, so it was very contested territory. There was even some talk that maybe Paraguay should have just been altogether gobbled up between Argentina and Brazil. Both sides kept arguing about keeping the territory and weren't able to solve it, so they agreed to ask for international intervention to settle the matter. Rutherford B Hayes ended up being the one to arbitrate this dispute. Through negotiations, they reached a conclusion that it was in Argentina's best interest to keep Paraguay around as a buffer state against Brazil, should the two nations ever come into conflict with each other. If Paraguay was divided, Brazil could take even more land and dispute the Chaco just like them, and just make it an even messier situation. So, in 1878, what they settled on was giving Argentina a strip of land, but awarding most of the Chaco region to Paraguay. Paraguay was very happy to still be a country. Hilariously, since Bolivia claimed the Chaco region as theirs but wasn't involved in the war, they saw this treaty as a scandal by giving land away that wasn't even theirs. Paraguay and Bolivia would end up fighting a very bitter war over the region in the 1930s, fittingly called the Chaco War. But for now, Paraguay was saved, and the Chaco seemed to be theirs. Paraguay in gratitude renamed the area the Presidente Hayes Department, and the city Villa Occidental was renamed Villa Hayes. While Paraguay's departments have changed a bit over the years, this department still remains today, a reminder of Hayes' legacy. Thus, President Hayes just might as well be the most impactful forgotten president that the United States ever had. Paraguay is definitely an interesting country, and if you're interested in learning a bit more about it, Mr. Beat made a video comparing Paraguay and Uruguay, so be sure to check that out. In the meantime, I'm Emperor Tigerstar, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.